Welcome back to another exciting episode of CEX Talks, where we explore the intersection of customer and employee experience. I'm your host, Abhi Jain, and today we are diving into a topic that's not just timely but transformative: how women led startups are shaping the future of work through innovative approaches to employee experience. And I'm thrilled to announce today's guest, two incredible leaders who are transforming the way startups approach people operations. They are themselves a startup, they're helping startups, and also they have created an entire ecosystem where startup leaders can help each other. Please welcome Aanchal Arora and Mitasha Singh, co-founders of All Things Talent, a company dedicated to helping startups build people first cultures that drive growth and innovation. Welcome Aanchal, welcome Mitasha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here.
Would you love to introduce yourself and what All Things Talent does to our viewers before we start?
Yeah, of course. Ashul, go ahead.
So, hi everyone. I'm Aanchal Arora, co-founder of All Things Talent. I also co-run a community of women entrepreneurs called Ladies Who Launch. Very excited to be here. I'm going to keep the introduction very brief, and I'm going to let Mitasha take us through what All Things Talent does.
Okay, awesome. Hey, Abhi, thanks for having us. I am an entrepreneur now, an investor in a couple of firms, and have been an operator in people ops for almost more than a decade. Did a bunch of things in different types of HR organizations, prop tech, fintech, alternative asset management. Started off with I think I'm riding on her claim to fame, but Vinita Singh was my first manager, the Shark Tank fame. I think exciting times, 2008 when startups were really startups and old school startups, the OG times to today. I think lots has happened. And the one thing I think that has stayed stable through is from a person who did not know what HR did and whether to do HR to realizing that there's so much value that an underrepresented function can bring in. I think All Things Talent is Aanchal and I, and both of our endeavor to make sure that we bring transparency, rigor, analytics, and data-backed decisions similar to what the fields of design and people ops and product ops and design have done for startups, and trying to make sure that we approach it in a way that is very founder friendly, very operator friendly, and not just corporate friendly that the function has got about. So that's a little bit about us as well as the organization.
Thank you both, and it's very timely. See, we have been doing a series, over the last 3 weeks, specifically, especially it's the Women's Month, talking about women leadership, how women are transforming the entire CX and EX space, and some of the common themes, which have emerged is how do you create the support systems? How do you specifically for women in leadership, right? Now, if you look at some of the recent data, it says 68% of the startups fail to align their employee and customer experience in the first 3 years. Why do you think so many companies struggle with this? And then how does you guys help them align that? So Achal, if you want to take that.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest challenges that most startups face is that while we focus a lot on product and sales and our customers, which is let's say our ICP, figuring out who my ideal customer profile is, breaking them down, services, product, all of that. I think when it comes to employee experience, it is just coincidental, right? There is no focus on that. In fact, we were just talking before we started, Abhi, on how Mitasha and I met. I think one of the common themes that both of us spoke about was how our best people learnings has been from product development, right? And which might seem very weird to probably a lot of people, listening this. But really, right? Like when we look at product development, we look at doing user research, we look at doing voice of customer, we do a continuous feedback loops, right? So on and so forth, right? The entire product life cycle that we talk about. To us, employee experience is no different, right? And the fact is that customer experience and employee experience are two sides of the same coin. One cannot be without the other, right? So when there's so much focus on customer, when there is so much focus on sales or product for that matter, I think it's time that organizations, especially startups, start realizing that unless we have the same focus, the same rigor on employee experiences, we will never be able to achieve that right customer experience either, right? So you mentioned how there is a misalignment in both customer experience and employee experience, right? One it plays into the other for that matter.
Let's build on that. Natasha, you talked about it in your introduction. So then are we suggesting that as you're defining your startup's goal, right? In terms of your vision as to what it is very important to take that first, define it. What are you going to stand for, and then take it back and hire the right employees, which fit with that. Is that what we're saying, Mitasha?
Yes and no. In theory, yes, for sure. In practice, I think these things are much harder and a lot more fluid, especially in startups. Of course, the bigger, see, we've also had this little bit of a trend of villainizing corporates and bigger organizations, right? I'm not going to get into the merits and demerits of that in this podcast, but like there have been significant strides made in the field of EX in larger organizations as they've scaled up, because they've, of course, grown to realize how important it is. The repeat black hole of operating expenses, attrition, the dark hole of, oh, we don't know why this is not working. Everything seems great on paper, but we don't know, the cost just got bloated. A lot of stuff that's not calculated, can't be attributed to anything, typically gets into OPEX. And we all know that, one of the ways EX contributes significantly to programs is via strengthening systems and performance of every small thing that every teams do. So is it hired that way and figured that way? Yeah, of course. There are organizations who spend a long time structuring things, making sure job descriptions, competencies, frameworks, everything align, everything's perfect, and they still mess up, but they do a good job of it. And then there are startups that constantly evolve and try to do the right thing. So I think as long as there's focus on understanding, fit versus the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it. I think we can, in the tech industry, get very caught up in what is trending. As long as people understand that FOMO needs to be let go of a little bit and we need to focus on fit, I think largely a lot of EX is dependent on fit. So yes, hiring and figuring things out once that's established is the right way to go, but it's a fluid process and not as easy when in early stage startups, at least.
I totally agree, because startups will pivot, right? Now they will keep on pivoting to find what the right fitment of their product or the service is, and hence things will evolve. But then that takes me to a thought, and we talk about, you mentioned data, in the beginning. So Anchal, when you're assessing any startups EX, when you get in and say, okay, hey, this is the roadmap we want to put. Are there any certain data points you start tracking, or the KPIs you put in place?
Oh, absolutely, Abhi. In fact, we do a bunch of assessments, if I may call them so, right, for startups to understand the employee experience that they're providing. So yes, there are KPIs, and I'll talk about it. But also there are a lot of qualitative measures, right, and both go hand in hand. But I will focus on KPIs given the question that you had. So for me, I don't go by the traditional KPIs that I would measure in an enterprise, right? Enterprise has all sorts of metrics that we've been done and dusted. For me, what's important is the time an employee takes after, let's say, an onboarding to start contributing, right? And there is no one day when somebody starts contributing. It's a very subjective metric, right? But that is, for example, very important. For me, what is really important is the structure that they put in place from an employee experience standpoint. What is extremely important again is the growth metrics, that are people actually growing. And by growth, I don't mean promotions. Saying, is someone actually able to contribute to a larger, the larger organization prerogatives? That for me is extremely important. So while there are a bunch of these KPIs, they are not the same KPIs that I would assess in an enterprise, right? Having said that, I think all of these are metrics that we evaluate. There are a lot of qualitative measures too, which I'm not getting into right now. So yeah, some of those metrics. For me, it would be an employee journey, much like a product journey, saying how is my employee evolving overall, right, from the entire employee journey standpoint. So some of those metrics to me are extremely important.
But how would you measure employee growth satisfaction? Because that's always a hard thing, correct? See, typically, when you talk about employee growth, they'll say, okay, have I been promoted? Am I getting more salary? Those are normally the top two things, which come up. But how would you measure that?
Can I say something? Like, I've been in the startup ecosystem for about last 10 years, including my stints. If I just remove my stints in enterprises, but I've largely been part of the the startup ecosystem, and have worked with about 40 startups in different capacities. One common realization that I had, which was also an unlearning for me, is that growth for employees who know the startup world and who want to grow here is not just money and promotions, right? Startups, by virtue of being the way they are, also means that you get to work on things that is not your area. You have an engineer handling HR, you have an HR, helping some VOC exercise with the product manager, right? So on and so forth. So I think the growth in startups really can mean a lot of things. One could be, do you Really the end is, are you really living up to your potential, right? That is the goal that I would say that's there. But growth is not only in terms of salary, not only in terms of promotion, but you're learning primarily.
Okay. And then Mitasha, so how would you contrast a successful EX implementation, versus, I wouldn't say a failed one, but versus, which needs more investment? Yeah.
There are the obvious signs, like she said, right? An obvious signs would be, let's look at it, break it down to very small startups to
Yeah.
slightly bigger startups, all right? Because it'll be much, of course, if you're 20 employees, Abhi, then you know when people
Good.
are not, right? So for nuances sake, let me not get into that. Anything less than 20, 30 employees, the founders know. And if they can pretend that they're not hearing the signals and all of that, but they know. Anything more than that, there are two ways to look at it. Managers, senior managers, that line of people, leads, not the VPs, but people below that, and your HR business partners. They will be the first to figure out with, oh, people aren't going above and beyond. Everything's fine. Nothing's immediately broken, because when it's broken, house is on fire. Then everyone knows. But, this is like steps towards that. Things seem okay. I think okay is honestly like one of the worst things an organization can hear, because generally, and when I say okay, I don't mean things are good. I mean, uninspired. Employees are okay. They're showing up on time. Hiring managers typically start complaining about quality of hiring consistently dropping. That's one of those things that people will be like, oh, you guys used to be able to hire really well, but no, nothing's really interesting anymore. People stop gravitating towards an employer's brand. These are some of the, you remember Anchal just mentioned quantitative and qualitative needs to get measured. So by the time you quantify some of these things, they will get quantified as time to productivity, your onboarding, etc. Scores will start falling. Revenue per employee will start falling. So when to me, RPE is one of the most important metrics, which is why, your Apple and all will very, very proudly publish it year on year that, hey, we are X and this is our highest. They don't talk about, whether we pay the highest, whether we retain the highest, but RPE is almost like a badge of honor that, hey, we are a lean team and this is what we do. Your mid journey, for example, is such a big example of all solopreneurs and indie tech founders being like, hey, you know what? Lean teams of 20 people can now do X ARR million in businesses. And that's something that's super exciting to them, because that means highest RPE. And a high RPE obviously means super high and highly engaged employees, because at the end of the day, you can hack it for a couple of years and you can like be shoddy and toxic and all of that, and you can hack it for 2-3 years. You can't hack it for 20 years. And something there is working, and which is why I said fit honestly is the bottom line to every question that you'll have, because there will be some organizations which have such bleeding edge technology that people will want to work in regardless of how toxic a CEO may be, because just to be able to be a part of that mission, work on that technology, do that research. And then there will be some who will just be like, okay, cool, you know what, this company looks out for me, my family, for my well-being, for how I am not just a disposable person. So yeah, people I think will need to invest more emotionally first and then financially, because a lot of times what I've noticed people do is they kind of take that easy route. Hey, we don't have enough money, which is why we can't focus on EX. To be honest, money is rarely a problem when it comes to focusing on EX.
Which is an interesting point, and you raise, in terms of emotionally bonding, with the employees, or your teams, first. But talk to me through an example, where you went in and you're like, one thing you saw and you're like, what, really? Any such moment, which are like really shocked you? Because see, we know examples of a lot of different toxic startup cultures and what happened to them. We won't go into the names.
First-hand example will be from a very close friend. There are a lot of examples I have from founders, but the most famous one that I've been personally heard and seen through a very close friend, I think, is at Microsoft. Every single person talks so highly of Satya Nadella. No one has, by the way, of course, the articles will be written on how he's turned Microsoft around, how it's now so modern compared to what it was. And then there are some which will just be like, oh, Microsoft's always going to be enterprise, it's boring tech. I've never heard anybody from my close set of leaders at Microsoft talk about, oh wow, this tech is so amazing, that this is why I'm at the company. No one. However, every single person is so impressed by his humility, the DNI initiatives, They do not want to leave simply because they are so well taken care of, from emergencies, surgeries, etc., of 50 lakhs, 80 lakhs, liver transplant, somebody's parents. Like, it's a family. If Satya comes into the office, he apparently speaks to interns, makes it a point to speak to interns. And individually, one on one, while having coffee, takes a break, brings somebody to lunch. He never has lunch alone, apparently. I don't know. These are, that's what I'm trying to say. These stories stay back. Whereas a lot of these smaller startups, you'd just be like, wow, we used to be 100 people and now we are 150. I don't have time to speak to the interns. You talk to some of the busiest and the most intelligent men on the planet, and they will always make space to talk to the junior employees, to keep their ear to the ground. The small things like that is what I would say makes a huge difference. Programs and all are fine, but it's the mindset.
And that's good. That brings me to my next point. So let's shift, from the big enterprise to startups, back. And then just from a perspective, and Achal, would love to get your perspective. You both, work with a lot of women entrepreneurs in India. India is the, I think, the fastest growing startup ecosystem, anywhere on the globe right now. So what unique perspective, have you observed, that women are bringing into this whole startup space, especially in the tech space? How are they changing culture? And
Sure. I'll just probably start, and Mitasha, feel free to pitch in. First and foremost, when we talk about women in tech, today, I don't think there's any woman entrepreneur who is not in tech. Okay. Whether I'm in HR, I'm running technically an HR or people ops consulting organization today, but we are still dealing with tech. We're still building things. We're still using our CRMs. We're still using all sorts of products. AI is part and parcel of our lives. I truly believe all of us are women in tech, right? I also mentioned about me running a community of women entrepreneurs, right? All in different areas, different specializations, domains, industries. And I think everyone's dealing with a tech problem. So I truly believe the world doesn't work if you're not in tech anymore. But having said that, I do think that the reality for women is different. And I'm not talking about, say, hey, you don't have the equal opportunity. While that is a problem and an issue, in especially, so both of us are in India, Abhi, in the country, different strata of society. Having said that, the opportunities have opened up a lot in areas, right? But does that take away all the biases that exist? No, right? Yes, while we like to believe that the glass ceiling has opened, it got shattered and what all and what not, but I still see women entrepreneurs, especially our generation, right? Our generation whose parents had early kids, and these are true demographic issues that we are facing today. And this generation who decided to have kids late. So they are right now entrepreneurs. They are taking care of children, right? Barely postpartum, 2, 3 years into it, but also into taking care of their parents, also into elder care, right? And that, I mean, is no joke. Women in India tend to be the primary caretakers, right? So when I look at women entrepreneurs, they're doing some great stuff, but these are some of the realities that I don't think are behind us. So while it seems like, we've shattered the glass ceiling, I think there is a long way to go, while, for us to achieve that equity that we keep talking about. Having said that, I think women also bring, and this is my observation, I don't have a research paper to quote or a percentage to quote for that matter, purely my observation of my experience of working with so many women entrepreneurs, is that women do bring in a bunch of things. One is the fact that they are very inclusive, right? Probably, it's our personal experiences or whatever that is. Second, I think the focus on employee experience, since that's what we spoke about, I find that extremely high in women led organizations. For me to crack through a male entrepreneur who's made up his mind that all of this is not okay, and I'm not blaming all of them, right? I'm talking about someone who's made up his mind, is far tedious as a journey compared to someone, let's say a female, who thinks all of this is BS to get through that person, through to that, a woman. So I think, one, they are better listeners, they learn better, there is higher empathy, and I have found them to be more inclusive.
but Natasha, any thoughts, from your side?
Yeah, I think it's one of those subjects I can talk about a lot. One of the things that we've been fighting a lot, we've been conditioned to fight a lot, is biological changes in biological energy levels. This is fully anecdotal, a very hot take. Most women will probably disagree with me, argue with me, say I'm biased. But the older I get, the more I realize that there are significant differences that I'm seeing in women in my age cohort, which is mid 30s, and men in my age cohort. Mentally be fresher, less fatigued, I'm not saying more effective, just simply more energetic. Women in their 30s, whether it's because of COVID, whether it's just because we're genuinely anxious and tired by this age, whatever it is, we seem to be slightly more tired. And I think it's easier working with women. One of the reasons being that we are very solutions oriented because we have lost patience for bullshit. The older we get, I think we're becoming more blunt, we're becoming slightly more free. And when you say, how do we break through to things? I think it's a superpower to be very results driven. We've lost our patience to, try too hard anymore. And I mean this with all due respect. Also, I acknowledge that it's a huge privilege to come from families, who've been super supportive. So I've actually never, I've had like microaggressions, being the first woman in a board meeting, getting your eyes rolled at, you like, I'm emotional, I'm loud, can you stop being so emotional versus being, I've actually had that meme happen. Like, the man is like, wow, so passionate, and the woman's like, please stop. You're too much. That's actually happened. And I was very embarrassed when that happened because I was like, oh, till now it used to be on Instagram. Now it's my life. So smaller things like that have happened. I come from a very fortunate place where I've not had very direct problems in feeling that way. I've also had like most of my managers and mentors so far, I've only reported it to male CEOs. So they've actually been very instrumental in encouraging my audacity to open my mouth and argue. I think probably one of the reasons I can do that is maybe because I have had male mentors, and because it's just been like, cool, if you do it, I'll do it.
But with that background in mind, with that learning, which you have gone through, what are the top one or two strategies, then you give to the women founders, specifically, because startup is a very high pressure environment,
Absolutely.
and the newer generation which is coming into the workforce is just far more, I would say, emotional. So what lessons, or what are the top two strategies you tell them?
To be very outcome focused, because at the end of the day, everything else will start. Like, women are very intrinsically, they need to be validated. We can have a group of 100 of us saying you're amazing, but till I feel I'm amazing, it will not matter to us. That, and one of the ways you build confidence is via internal validation, is via doing well. So I think being outcome focused and to make sure you're putting in great work and seeing those results makes them believe a lot more in themselves. And I think one of the things that I typically always coach young women in tech, particularly, is to, I think, more than the whole access to men, women, what I focus on is to be able to, regulate their sincerity and their need to impress with what they're actually moving the needle on. I think we also generally tend to be more emotional, get pulled into a lot of things, get tired faster. So it's very clearly very outcome driven approaches, as well as asking for help, taking solidarity, within your girl group and your guy group, guy friends.
Basically, no need to impress, just deliver, right? So
I think that really works because that's what
yeah,
shuts everyone up.
correct.
Because
I
everyone
think
knows we are like, they were dealing with different types of roles, right? Like as a
correct.
wife, as a mother, some people have difficult parents-in-law, some people have difficult caregiver situations. So the only thing that really shuts everyone up, including your inner voice, which says you're not good enough, is just getting the job done.
Can I just add something to this, Abhi?
Please.
Uh, I think for me, and I'm just speaking from personal experience again, I think confidence did not come from knowing it all, right? At all. For me, I think at some point in time, probably a few years back, not very long ago, I think I realized that it's okay to not know it all. And that's a conversation I keep having with other women entrepreneurs. I think we also, as probably as women, I don't know if it's a women problem or not, but at least with me, I would beat myself a lot more if I wasn't perfect in a meeting, if I didn't do the presentation perfect. And to me, not knowing everything is all right now, right? Uh, if I mess something up, it's all right, right? I will still live the next day. And also realizing very quickly in the last few years that everyone's really just winging it. No one's got it all figured out, no matter how senior, how successful everyone is. I think to me, for women, I just tell them two things. One, confidence is not about knowing everything. Second, please figure that everyone's just winging it. And third, just own your space, right? It's okay. Just own your space, make it your own. Whether you it up, you don't, please beep it, right? It's really none of your problems. We'll figure. We'll live another day to sort it out.
And I don't think it's a gender thing at all. I think
Hope
it
so.
applies very universally
Hmm.
that there's always a need to impress, which is the way, I think traditionally the businesses and the business leaders depicted, I would say 20 years back, thing, hey, we know it all, listen to me, and then just follow this, right? And then that has definitely changed. That has definitely changed in the law.
Disagree a little bit. I think, despite how confident this younger generation is, and I do think there is a slight bias there, women are very eager to please, a little too much. Younger girls, like I say it with personal experience around me, as well as now that I see, not that the men are not or the younger boys aren't, they just get over things a little faster. So it doesn't really matter that much. They get up, chin up the next day. It's a little easier. I think it's uh, women need a lot more emotional pep talk to get them to where they are if they don't come from that kind of confident, maybe college or family background or
Got
whatever.
it. Okay. With that, I'll take the question to Achal, because I'm sure this will be quite close to her previous experience. Employee experience ownership, should it be with HR or operations?
Uh, Abhi, I'm going to say something which might be slightly not the most popular thing to say. I truly feel that over years, and I'm saying this very consciously with a lot of this thing, HR as a function, the way it exists today in the organizations, may not exist, right?
Okay.
Uh, while that is a different issue to solve for, having
Well,
said
that was my
that,
next question, anyways. Sure.
okay, cool.
You know, so is like you're hearing about employee experience officers, then there's HR officers. Do you see that converging? Do you see that shifting, mutating? And then in that context, should it be owned by operations or should it be things?
Sure. And I'm purely talking about, my point of view here. See, employee experience is not one person's job, right? It's an experience that we create, and I continue to equate it to different functions, whether it's a sales or an, your, whatever other function that you don't talk about, product management, whatever. It's not one person's job. It is an organization's job to create a certain employee experience. It starts well before an employee gets onboarded. It ends much after the employee has left the organization, right? So it is a journey that one has to go through, and no one person can own it, no HR can own it, not even one CEO can own it. Only people who can drive it can definitely be people responsible for driving it, but ownership cannot be with one person at all. I think it's an org wide ownership. If it's a startup of two people, let's say co-founders, how we behave today is the culture of the company. And if we think, hey, we're going to have a great culture when five people come in and employee experience is going to be great just because, what, we are from the people ops background, I think that's absolutely false, right? End of the day, culture really impacts employee experience. What is culture? Culture is the way we behave. So, I would go back to the top people and say, how is it that they behave in the company, and how the work gets done also determines employee experience. How is your manager behaving determines employee experience. Think about it from a startup lens. And you said, well, let's focus on the startups for a minute. So, startups usually start with hustling, right? We hire hustlers, we hire people who can do everything under the sun. We hire doers, we hire makers. And suddenly, when they've done a bit for the company and we're seeing some success, the immediate next step is making them into people leaders. You know what? Those doers and makers are not necessarily the greatest leaders. Right? And then we talk about the whole toxic ecosystem in most startups. So to me, every role that I spoke about in the last 2 minutes is responsible for employee experience. So I would not say a manager, I would not say HR, I would say everyone. And if the onus has to lie with one person to ensure that the employee experience responsibilities are divided well, has to be with the top guy.
An interesting comment you made, which makes me reflect. Right today, every startup or even bigger organizations, because revenue is so paramount. Okay, and revenue is driven by hustling. Okay, hustling is typically a type A or a very aggressive type A plus plus personality, and suddenly that gets celebrated because it's bringing in revenue. Okay, and that transforms into culture. Okay, so how do you prevent, Mitasha, as you work with startups, how do they design more inclusive EX initiatives? I know we talked about the role, the fitment. So how do you do that analysis of fitment? Given you will pivot.
Sure. Firstly, I don't think there's anything wrong with uh, being, as long as somebody is transparent about hustle culture or whatever their role entails. I personally think that's the best thing someone can do, because being honest and upfront about what's needed. See, at the end of the day, it's a private company. We're talking about capitalism. We're talking about startups, started usually by 1, 2, 3 people, and then this mammoth shape that it takes because of money, right? Whether they want to, dance around and do Burning Man parties, or they want to work through the night, as long as people are transparent about it, I personally don't see any problems. And I wouldn't want to impose my ideas of what, a good work life balance, integration, whatever EX looks like on organizations that typically need that kind of work. It's very hard, so at some point, that whole analogy of pushing that cart on the upward slope is the only way. You're the challenger to a big company, right? That's the truth. That's the only way startups do make it. You really do need somebody to put in their blood, sweat, tears. It's just that it needs to be done consciously. That's my only thing. So in terms of how do we gauge fitment, what happens, like Aanchal said, a lot of it is driven by the founders. I am yet to meet anybody in my very limited experience where the entire culture of a company was way different from the culture of the co-founders and their interaction, because at the end of the day they've started it, so it cannot be anybody else's, right? If there is that authority, sure, one co-founder may lead over the other, and power dynamics, work dynamics exist everywhere, but fitment firstly is to genuinely know what are the kind of values that founders espouse, what are the kind of values they enact. There's something that Aanchal is very fond of, and we are very fond of talking in our cohorts that we do with the leadership dev team. We all have ideas that we would want to espouse, and then we have ideas that we'd like to enact. I have my ideas of, okay, this is who Mitasha is, but then Mitasha is perennially 5 minutes late. That is the reality, that is the truth. It doesn't matter whatever she does, this is a culture that she brings to the table. Now if ATT says we respect time over and above everything, I can try, but the reality is I don't at this point of time respect those 5 minutes. I just cannot. And maybe when I get to it, I'll be like, okay, cool, I've overcome this hurdle. So the first fitment is really getting founders to understand that whatever they're doing, there are trade-offs to it. There are certain priorities that we'll have to figure out. Like it's very similar to CX, right? If you're a customer obsessed company, you focus in a certain way. Your processes, the way you function, the way you behave, what you tolerate is at the end of the day what sets the tone. So what do you tolerate in the name of employee behavior? What do you tolerate in the name of culture? That's what sets the tone. And I think the fitment can only be abstract and approximate. If it works, if you or I work really well in a particular stage of a company for the next year and a half, that's good enough. I think we also need to be a lot more positive that Abhi or Mitasha or Aanchal will not work for X organization for 5 years. Maybe they're going to be great for 2 years, and it's time to celebrate people moving on, rather than just being like, oh cool, now this person's really not working and freaking out, because at the end of the day, every 2 3 years a fast growing startup and an organization that's doing well, in fact,
Yeah.
changes and evolves, right? So it's 30%, 20% of your workforce will evolve with these changes, 60, 70% will not. And I think that's just very matter of fact. We get too emotional about these things.
I love a couple of points you raised, like in terms of being honest, being defining, what is the minimum tolerance level, or, what is the weakest link you will accept. Okay.
Minimum viable employee experience.
Yeah, correct. Right. So,
Yes.
so
We are
what is
talking about
that?
that.
Yeah. Correct. And then accepting, right, that change will happen. Change will happen in multiple ways. And to accept both employees, your definition of the market, your customers, and then how do you pivot on that? No, which is great. No, with that, we are almost at the end of our time. We covered a lot of ground today, in terms of what startups should focus on, what is the overall changing challenges, from a demographics perspective, how should an EX be defined, where should it reside, to all of that. As a parting thought, any, one thing, you want our viewers to take away, as we close this out.
I think very quickly for me, since we're talking about employee experience, I would just hope that all the organizations or all the leaders who are listening to this, whether you're founders, whether you're team managers or your individual contributors, when it comes to employee experience for yourself or your team members, just make it with intention. We don't need a lot of money, we don't need a lot of policies. All we need is the right principles in place, and as long as it's built with intention, I think employee experience can outshine and really get you results. That's all. Anything from you, Mitasha?
Yeah. I think I'd love, firstly, thanks for bringing this up. A lot of business podcasts. I mean, I've noticed a lot of folks do HR podcasts, business podcasts differently. So I truly appreciate you bringing different kinds of topics up. And this is exactly what I'd like people to take away. I think people ops has been a very underrepresented function. No wonder it sucks. We did a lot for design. We did a lot for growth and marketing and revenue ops. We did a lot for product management and product ops. I think it's high time we do the same for people ops, not for HR practitioners, simply for the function. And EX is one of those things. It's simply internal stakeholders. It's common sense. There's multiple studies out there that will tell us how EX is positively correlated to, every single thing, every single metric on this planet. And it seems pretty common sense, right? Till no one owned CX, it was not a thing. So I think it's just that. I think just focusing on whether you have an HR department or not, you don't really need one. You don't need an HR leader. You don't need anything except intention, like Anshul said. And just the fact that our work through ATT is also all about that, right? Like we want to make sure that the focus remains on giving this workforce the best options possible, regardless of whether there is a full-fledged people ops function or not.
Thank you. And where do people find you? If anyone of our audience wants to reach out to you, how do they get in touch with you?
The best in this way is email and LinkedIn. I think both of us are super active on LinkedIn, like you said, and we can link our links.
And then for our viewers, we will drop all of those in the comment section below.
Yes,
but
please.
But thank you both. Thank you for joining us. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
And I wish you both best of luck.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, viewers, for watching us.
Thank you, Natasha.